Andrew, I've had this great desire to understand science and religion, and I like to see them in conflict because conflict is a mechanism to generate truth. Not perfectly, not always, but it's that way. And the question is how to do that. By the two disciplines dealing together seems so asymmetric in their methodologies that sometimes they're talking past each other, maybe oftentimes. You're in an interesting position that not only are you been a working scientist in particle physics and a theologian, a priest, but you're also a serious philosopher with a doctorate in philosophy. So if I pull that apart, if I take the philosophy out of your trilogy of things and put the philosophy on top and make you as a philosopher look down on your being a scientist and a theologian, what would Andrew the philosopher say about Andrew the scientist and Andrew the theologian?
Gosh. Well, let's start from first principles, because all philosophers are meant to start with first principles. So what is philosophy? And the meaning of philosophy is the love of wisdom. And wisdom deals with first causes and principles of things. So you can assemble many facts about the world, as we do in the science, but the passage to wisdom is to find the small number of underlying ideas which explain those many facts.
Yeah, general features of the world.
That's right. So electromagnetism, for example, starts with electric fish and lightning and static electricity, and we end up with Maxwell's equations. It's a very small, compact description of a huge range of phenomena.
Right.
So philosophy is there in science, and philosophy is there in theology as well, because with philosophy we apply, or we should apply, philosophical reasoning to the content of purported revelation and work out what it says, what it implies, how different facts are meant to be reconciled, how inconsistencies to be reconciled. And philosophy actually gives birth to a new discipline as a result, which we call theology. So philosophy underpins what we do in science, the general pattern of what we do in science, although it's often unrecognized by many scientists. And it also, I would say, gave birth to theology. So we need something of that discipline in both fields.
So this is the process I like, because what I don't like is then somebody saying using philosophy to harmonize these two. Using philosophy to understand the general features, the depth of each, and then maybe they'll naturally come together, maybe they won't. But if we use philosophy to understand the depth of each one, then progress can be made.
Right.
And so what I like to do sometimes is to take issues and stress them, put pressure on each one through philosophical arguments. And one that comes up in theology and pressuring theology, particularly the Christian religion, is to ask about extraterrestrial intelligences, because you're suddenly in a problem if you have sentient beings like, in some sense, like human beings. What do you do with the incarnation and the core theological doctrines of needing Christ to have an incarnation of God and then to go through the suffering, the death, and the resurrection? Because the claim is that that's for all time and all people. And as a scientist, statistically, big question, you would think that with 200 billion galaxies, each one having 100 to 200 billion stars, the number of stars and now planets that we know, I mean, the statistical likelihood of sentient creatures is fairly high. There's arguments, but how do you articulate that? How do you stress test theology with the question of extraterrestrial intelligences?
Well, a quick answer would be go and read a decent author on this subject. So C.S. Lewis wrote a wonderful short essay called Religion and Rocketry, which is still one of the best compact descriptions. So that would recommend that as a starter. So let C.S. Lewis do the hard work. But with regard to these questions, very quickly we'd have to start applying philosophy to both science and theology. And you give us some examples. What is life? That's actually a very difficult question to answer. How would we recognize life if we see it? how we measure intelligence. So very quickly we've got to bring in some pretty hard philosophical thinking on these questions if we were to resolve the question of extraterrestrial life.
But that alone, if you have to think hard, you think deeply about how to analyze life, and doesn't that sort of undermine the theological basis? Because theology seems to have developed in a pre-scientific world where those questions were irrelevant. So now that you have those questions, it seems to make theology less universal in its power.
Let's give an example, a parallel from earlier in the history of Christianity. So St. Augustine could believe in many extraordinary things, but didn't believe in the existence of Australians. So that would be the equivalent of in his time. But we learned to cope with the existence of Australians, and and theology grew to accommodate them. And there's some very fine theologians in Australia now, and I think that would. Or the New World. I mean, that raised interesting theological questions with Columbus and afterwards, as we encountered our long-severed cousins in the human evolutionary tree.
I think those are cute analogies, but I don't think they're really as effective in dealing with extraterrestrials, because the former was a lack of knowledge that similar human beings exist in other places. And, it's an analogy, I understand, but if you're dealing with totally different forms of life or intelligence, then you're in a totally different category. My argument would be is that theology is incapable of dealing with that because theology is pre-scientific.
Okay. Let me just say that our quest is to find truth. The title of the show, Close to Truth. I want to know the truth. I want to go looking.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
Okay.
I'm with you.
Whatever's out there.
I'm on your team.
Let's find out. That's the first thing. And as for the implication of theology, well, it would depend a lot on what we find. But what I would say is a warning from theology is what we don't want to encounter are intelligent beings, more intelligent and advanced than we are, who suffer from the effects of original sin. That might be bad news for us. So maybe there's a warning from theology.